Hi everybody, my name is Alan. On behalf of the crew, I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Bridging Heaven and Earth. You know, for all of us, so much goes on in our lives. I say that every show, and yet we do this show, we shoot it live every couple of weeks. And for all of us, in those couple of weeks since the last time we came together, or if you're watching the show a week ago, or if you're watching the show an hour ago, there have been a lot of things that happen in your life. A lot of breaths have transpired. A lot of opportunity for growth, for consciousness. A lot of opportunities for happiness, for sadness, for bliss, for joy. And in our lives, do we really go and choose that? Do we really go after that with a hunger to know that joy, that we instinctively know this life has available to us? Do we feel the love that we know is available? Do we feel the love and do we share the love that we know is available? And you know, most of us are in some gray area. We don't do it all the time, and we don't never do it. So somewhere, all of us as human beings are in the middle of seeking that experience of love, seeking that experience of knowing, seeking that experience of consciousness in this human body, which we know is there. Somewhere in us, something knows. In the middle of the night we wake up, we know. When we see the ocean, we know. When we see a bird flying through the sky, when we see a child, our child, when we see someone who we love or are in love with, we know that there's a magnificence available. And what do we do to seek that out? I mean, throughout history there have been religions, there have been many things that try and do to some extent bring us into that experience. And we know we want to have more of that. And tonight's guest is someone whose hunger to know that truth was so strong that he took action that probably most of us wouldn't have taken. He was probably closer to one side or the other in that continuum of our hunger for that truth. Jerry Wennstrom is an inspirational artist, and he's the author of The Inspired Heart, which is an artist's journey of transformation. There are amazing stories of growth, pain, and love in that book. At one point in his life, Jerry was an extraordinarily talented, successful, driven artist, painter, famous, coming into wealth, coming into money. And he took all of that because he knew that there was something else, that this was preventing him in some way from knowing that connection, knowing that love, knowing that joy, that true joy. And he took all of it, gave every cent he had away, I think he burned every piece of art he had, and started on a journey to know that truth. And it took him literally everywhere, internally and externally. But the intent and the goal was always the same, to know that essence of who he was, which when we know that essence, we realize it's the essence of what we all are. And there's also an extraordinary video that has been put together about Jerry's life in the Hands of Alchemy. It was a video, a parabola video by Phil Lucas and Mark Sadin, and it's extraordinary. We're going to show two different sections of it tonight. So please join me in a short meditation, then we'll have the video, and then we'll have Jerry. And his story is our story, to one degree or another. And our story is his story. So it's an opportunity for us all to hear one person's quest for that truth. So please join me in a short meditation. Thank you. So we're going to start tonight's show with the first section of a video done about Jerry's life, and it talks about what he did and how he did it and the reasons for it. It's called In the Hands of Alchemy. It's a parabola video by Phil Lucas and Mark Sedan. So just settle in. There's an extraordinary hour available for all of us.
I think it was amazing that the sequence of events happened, that the artwork was filmed and was there, and then the work was destroyed and was still there to tell the story of it. And it seems like that was all just part of the mythos that was unfolding. I think that first film captured that phase in Jerry's life in a pretty dramatic way. To go from the fullness of overwhelmment of images that you're bombarded with in that film to the stillness of the letting go. I think that comes through, and I think it affects people in very different ways. You know, some people are very agitated by it, some people are very touched by it. I think it presses people in places that they may have sensitivities about the creative process or, you know, what you do with your life. And so it's very evocative, and that's a powerful work in that way.
One day, I just knew something important was going to happen, some step closer to God. And I began fasting. And for 15 days, I didn't eat anything. And for the next 15 days, I ate only the scraps that came by chance from God. And after about a month, an inspiration came through the heart that was so strong that I just cried and I couldn't deal with it. It was so powerful that I just knew I had to destroy the work. And when I said no, because it was like dying, and to give up all that I'd been, all of my talent, all of my education, all of my money, was very scary. But to say no was to enter into absolute darkness, absolute hell. And that was my stinky little will, trying to hold back the giant of God. And when I said yes, I instantly was elevated beyond what I can't even talk about. And so on the strength of that black and white simplicity, which was not about me, and not about art, and not about anything in this world, but just about what's real, I destroyed all of my paintings. And I just can't tell you the miracle that has been since then. But all I'm saying in simple, loving words is that only God is real.
It seems to me that Jerry, showed an incredible kind of courage in following an image which, to begin with, actually exiled him from his discipline and exiled him from his inheritance and cast him in a way out into the dark. But if you actually look into the artistic traditions you'll see that this is a well-known motif. If you take Dante's Commedia, for instance, it begins with the words in medieval Italian where Dante said, "Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita mi ritrovai per una selva oscura." In the middle of the road of my life, I awoke in the dark wood where the true way was wholly lost.
If anything was given to the form that I so much believed in, called art, I think it has been more about surrender and defeat rather than accomplishment and success in an obvious sense where one is in control of one's reality. I have never known a greater moment than the moment I destroyed my art and what life became after that, which included giving away everything I owned, giving all my money away, celibacy, and living this way for the most part for 15 years. My life has been a strange one. It has been strange even to me. And I feel like it has made more sense as time goes on, and I feel like it's sensible in relation to where it is we as a world are going.
The powerful experiences you feel from Jerry's life and work is that there's a tremendous underlying faith to it, and a faith in the emergence of things, and a lack of willfulness. And I think one of the great things about the horizon of death is that you intuit that on the other side you will have to exist without your willful attempt to hold everything together. And so what you're actually doing is joining the great belonging.
His art, as far as I'm concerned, is his life. There is no separation. And his life as it manifests with whoever comes into his mandala, whether they are the most extraordinarily well-known people of import or the most humble and lost and troubled people. And that ability to be absolutely present in the most rigorous honesty and genuine compassion of anyone I've met on this planet is his art.
I have a friend, a young girl by the name of Lucy. One day I had heard she had been ill and I went to visit her. I was working on this art piece and I thought I would include her face. And while visiting her, she was showing me a school project that it was actually dissecting these owl pellets, which included hair and teeth and bone. She had them all displayed on a little piece of paper. This was all very connected to the final outcome of this art piece, I thought, because the art piece also had hair and teeth and bone. And part of the way this thing unfolded is Lucy's illness just held on for the longest time. And she was brought to the doctor and finally to the hospital where they diagnosed an illness called a homunculus, which it's a tumor in the lung. And the tumor actually produced hair and teeth and bone. I just felt this whole process, and having such love for Lucy as this phenomenal little being who's very much in Marilyn in my life, who we love very much, I felt it was just this kind of magical connection. And there's something about when that happens with my creations that I feel all is well on the creative front. In terms of art, I feel like that's what I most want to be about right now, that mystery. And I don't think it's about knowing as much as it is about living into the love we feel for other people.
Hi, welcome. We're on the set with Jerry. Welcome, Jerry.
Thank you, Alan.
So you've just finished a new book, actually. Well, when we're taping this, it's not out yet. It will be out probably when it's shown around the country. called The Inspired Heart. Now, what is an inspired heart to you?
Well, first of all, I didn't title the book. It was titled by my publisher. But we worked out and came up with it, at some level together. But if I had to define the inspired heart, I think it's the heart attuned to God, to the nature of our, the best of who we can be by way of being open to the mystery and to what is new and coming at us in our life without interference. I mean, I think the best of inspiration comes from that kind of connection to that deepest part of ourselves.
If you could have titled the book, what would you have titled it?
Well, interestingly enough, the book started, I was getting on the ferry, the Whidbey Island ferry one day, and we parked our car by a little door on the ferry boat, and it had a sign on it that said accessible void. And I just loved that sign. And whenever we parked again on the ferry getting on, when I saw that sign, I always felt some funny little blessing, because I love the idea of an accessible void, a void that filled our lives with, understanding and gifts and all the possibilities that come in the emptiness that I walked into. So I somehow wanted that in the title, but it didn't work that way.
How can a void be fulfilling? How does that work?
Well, I think we often associate a void with everything that looks and feels like death. And that being the case, we often, if we identify with whatever we can identify with. If you're a doctor or whatever, if someone says, "Who are you?" I think we all have something that we almost need to say we are, to define who we are. And so in some way, everyone wants something to say about who they are. And I think the exploration for me into that void was about finding who am I without any identity. And I certainly identified excessively with being an artist. And it was beginning to get in the way of something I was intuiting was more, but I just simply didn't have the capacity within my limited range of will and intelligence and good intention to find what that was. So somehow entering that void was an attempt at just coming to a place where I either wanted to know that aspect of being that I intuited to be more powerful than my limited understanding, or I didn't want to be on the planet. It was that kind of, very powerful desire to know something more. It didn't make sense to live at some level fearing everything that looked like death and emptiness. And what I found was the fact that it's full of everything that is renewing and life-affirming. And even in destroying my art, which looks like, so you've given up as an artist and there's no way you're going to touch the world with your art, which I believed in, the opposite came of it. Everything that looked like emptiness filled life back up. And I think, to me, that's what the void has come to mean. It's the place of renewal. And I trust, who knows, but I trust even at death, it'll just be another adventure full of renewal.
So, when you came to that, was that something that happened spontaneously, like one day, or was that over a period of time of dissatisfaction?
It was over a period of time, but I feel like the gods whisper before they scream. And I think the whispers were beginning to happen. The intuitive feelings like there's something more, the messages that come through. For example, I was working closely with an artist, an older artist in his 80s who was going blind. And I was saying, he had to give up his art because he was going blind. And I would talk to him about, trust even blindness. Well, that's what you have to do. Find the magic in going blind and find the reality that is the gift behind a worst case scenario for him. And so, you know, he would say things like, well, that's easy for you to say, you're young and you're just starting out, and, you know, and so I just felt like I needed to experience that same unknowing myself. It was easy for me to say, but I also, and I think there were just many, many whispers like that that came through that were just indicators that put your money where your mouth is.
And had you had like either religious or spiritual upbringing or as part of your life? Or is that where you would head or not head? I mean, what was before, kind of?
Well, I think I've always been on a spiritual path. I don't think it had very much to do with my upbringing, you know. I grew up in a poor black neighborhood. It wasn't, you know, my parents, you know, there were sort of token gestures about going to church occasionally. My mother was Italian Catholic, and, you know, that was sort of roughly what we were, but it had, I don't think that was the influence. I think the very nature of creative exploration is a spiritual path, and I did it, you know, I often say if I could have painted my way to heaven, I would have done it because I tried hard enough, and now I can say you can't get there from here. You know, there's not enough will and intelligence to...
Where can you get there from?
I think in some way that's the paradox. You have to give it your very, very best attempt at finding your own pure heart, at finding what most makes you come most alive, whatever it is. It's always something creative. It doesn't have to be painting. I mean, for me, it happened to be. But I think ultimately what does it is, so the paradox, we have to give it everything we've got with all the passion we have, all the will. And we also have to know that failure is written in. And I think the failure is where most of us back down. But the failure, within the failure, is the renewal. That too becomes the void because, you know, because what we come to realize is that it's not enough. We're not enough. And so where do you go from here?
So in essence, you have to make so much effort that you realize that you can't do it. And then kind of grace can come in behind that?
That's how it was for me. I can't say that's the way for everybody, but I also think from working with so many people in the area of having to go through that kind of death experience in one way or another, even the failures in life like divorces or financial ruin, whatever, I see that it seems to be pretty much the way it is. You know, I think people start out thinking they're going to have the most beautiful marriages with the most beautiful children and live happily ever after, or, you know, whatever their ideal dream is. It's often the failure that really gives it to them.
And why do you think that is? Do you think that because it opens them up and makes them vulnerable, makes them available?
Yeah, and a level of humility. You know, I think if we could do it without God, we would be God. And I just don't think we make very good gods, you know, being embodied completely. So I think that's why. I mean, I think it's part of like that quantum leap from the human limitation to the divine. In some way, it's the in-between world, you know, the place between effort and inspiration.
So that process, as it proceeded for you, I mean, did it seem to have cycles? Did it go steadily uphill, steadily downhill? Did you have to hit rock bottom? Okay, you were exhilarated. You burned everything. You know, you're a new man. And then 15 years passed, and there was a lot of stuff. And so, was that realization a consistent process, or did it just spike? I mean, how did it work for you?
Well, for starters, I just knew by the nature and the power of the experience that something very important happened. I had no...
By giving away everything and burning everything. So there was just a tremendous momentum at that point.
Yes. And I think the clincher, you know, that moment, which was most the gift of it, was after I destroyed the work, the film that was being made about my life in 1979.
Which we saw part of, the beginning.
Yeah, there's footage in there
footage from that.
in the new one. But
right.
And the film was shown at a very artsy establishment, and just by way of a lot of amazing coincidences, I actually ended up there, which I had not planned to do. And there were several, probably a couple hundred people in the audience, very, very New York savvy art crowd. And and in the 70s, art was God, and all these folks were riding high on that false God, and I had defied their God by destroying my work. And that night, Einstein says, matter never dies, it just changes form. That night, I felt was the most powerful night of my life. I felt all the energy that went into the art, all the drive, all the will, all the hopes and dreams came through by way of a kind of abstract beingness. And I think that's what I was looking for, that kind of being that didn't need the doing, that didn't need the having, that didn't need the expression. It was more a moment of awe rather than any sort of expression. And I feel that was the sort of initiation into the beginning of the journey that lasted for 15 years. And from there, it was a really intense learning process. Learning by way of non-interference, living, never asking anyone for anything, hardly touching money. Whatever came, I accepted, which meant, often insane street people, beautiful people, every variety of experience coming and being absolutely present with it without interfering. And that was the learning experience, which also included an enormous amount of fasting, because I ate when I had food and I didn't when I didn't. And so there were just, that experience of
Okay, so you burned everything and you left your gallery. Did you just walk into Manhattan? Did you walk, you were living in Nyack at the time, Nyack, New York?
Yeah.
What was the process? Okay, you did this thing. So you immediately left your apartment and just...
Well, that's a big question, because you're talking 15 years.
Well, tell me how you started.
Yeah. Well, I had a loft. We were in a building full of artists. We had a landlord sympathetic to artists, this incredibly beautiful loft overlooking the Hudson River. It was in 2 sections. A friend wanted the loft, very cheap rent, $75 a month. A friend needed a studio. He took the studio. He paid the rent, so I was there for a while. The moment I was really in no man's land is one day a new person purchased the building, and I had the most beautiful space. I was the only person living in the building, and he wanted to live in my space. And so he came knocking on the door one day, and he said, you're going to have to leave. And I says, well, how soon do you want me to go? And he said, as soon as possible. And I literally walked out the door and never returned.
With him? You walked right past him?
Yeah. And that was the beginning of the adventure of that kind of reality. Interestingly enough, I never spent one day on the street. There was always something that came through. I've never been on the street. Overnight, sleeping out.
So never on a grate, never on a park bench, never in the woods?
No.
And that's for 15 years, 365 days?
Yes. Without money.
But you married 7 times. No.
12.
12 times. Why don't you tell some of the more interesting experiences that happened?
Well, that's very much what the book is about, which are the magic, the places where, there were moments, and I think I didn't do life well enough. I wasn't so completely lovable that the world wanted to take care of me. I blew it at times. I would become afraid. There were just challenges that were overwhelming. And all I know is that in the process of fiercely continuing this path unconditionally... Because
you felt that something in this path you needed to experience.
And the magic carried it. That's what I'm saying here. Even though I didn't do it so perfectly, when all else failed, I failed, human beings failed, everything around me failed, something always came through that carried my life. And it was often at the, and again, there's the void. The void is that even I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to do this life. I don't know how to be such a perfect human being. I don't know where I'm going or what I'm doing. And it was again, the prototype that happened in the destruction of the work, which was the surrender to that void, became the reoccurring learning experience where I had to do it again and again. And I actually got quite good at it. And it's when I got good at it that life changed, and all of a sudden the challenge was coming back to the world. You know, it's like all of, you know, the world was coming at me, and I wasn't sure if it was just some strange, if, you know, if I was going to like blow the hard-earned territory I had come to really get comfortable with. I got good at fasting. I got good at trusting. And then it was like the world, it says, okay, it's almost like the God
Was
says,
there a moment when you knew that you were going to have to get an apartment, live more like other people, where you had done that journey and the lessons from that journey were done in a way?
I don't think there was a moment. I think it's like the tide. You know, the tide goes out, and when it's out, and it's neither coming or going. It's a very sort of
still.
Yeah, an unknowing moment. You don't know if you're to go with the tide going in or you're still going out. And so I think it was more like that. It was a real moment of unknowing. And so with the world, a sensing and intuiting and literally having the world coming back to me.
How did that manifest? The world, you were always in the world. You're always walking in the world in some way. I mean, you didn't go to a cave somewhere and be by yourself.
No.
So how did you know that the connection, the nexus was getting more or changing in a significant way?
Well, like for one thing, sexuality, you know, there was a lot of sexual energy that was coming at me. You know, I was...
Well, had more than for the other 14 or so years?
No. This wasn't, I mean, we're talking, you know, I've left coming back to the world, you know, probably was the beginning of it. And again, it was a slow tide process. It's not a quick thing. You know, probably happened about, 10 years later where, I mean, it was just the beginning of the tides coming back. And so the sexual energy and what to do with that. And so a kind of tantric exploration, but not being sexual, still, living out this 10 years of celibacy, but the sort of return of the energy of it and what do you do with it? And so at some level, it took a lot of courage to explore that and to find its limits, and hold that, integrity, a kind of inner place of what's real and where do I go, and explore it, not in a moral sense, but in an energetic sense of where can you go and survive this and explore that. And I think that, I think that's the nature of tantric, the sort of tantric experience. And so that was the beginning of it. And then, going to Whidbey Island, moving to Washington, that was a gift of money that brought me there. And Whidbey Island was the real return to the world. It was like that's where the world came back and everything that my life is now is. And again, that was several years of opening up to the possibility of relationship, taking that further and watching it and still not knowing and just literally being in the world more. I volunteered at this restaurant to support a Waldorf school. I ended up running the place with all volunteers. It was just the most magical, beautiful place where, full of tears and laughter and had very little to do with restaurant and a lot to do with human beings interacting. And so, but to be so out in the world physically as running a restaurant was a new experience, but it just kept going from there, meeting my wife, Marilyn, and ultimately getting married, married about 7 years ago. And then, the new film being made, the book, I mean, it's just still going. And I feel like I can have the world because it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter either way. And what holds the reality together of this world that I love being in the world, is the fact that there's a part of me, and I think between God and I, God knows I mean business, I could really walk away from all of it again. And I think it's that willingness to walk away that continues to renew it. Because I still don't know how to do relationship, I don't know how to do life, I still don't make money, I mean, but money comes, you know, there have been grants and great, you know, the film, which was expensive to make, friends paid for it, and I mean, it's still working. And I don't know where it's taking me, but I think part of the way it works is that it doesn't matter if I'm in the world or not, and frankly, it's more fun being in the world.
On that note, we'll show the second half of the video, and then we'll come back with Jerry for some more. But this is in the Hands of Alchemy, and this is some of Jerry's newer art that he's done more recently. And it's a parabola video, In the Hands of Alchemy.
There was something about the intensity of trying to break through inspiration when I was younger and painting in the studio. You know, it was like just a desperate hammering on heaven's door, and sometimes you got in a little bit, most of the time you didn't. And now it's sort of like all the aspects of life are footsteps to gifted arrivals. You know, it's like you do all the things with equal attention and equal importance and lightness, and in some way there are just these moments that inspiration unfolds, and there's just a grand connection between all things. And art now takes longer for one piece to happen, but it's very much a complete expression of all aspects coming together. And there's a lot more freedom now. There's not this despair. There's no reason to do it except the same reason that you do everything else in your life. And because I happen to do art and it's what I love to do, it's a natural, simple expression of that all-inclusive process. But it's one little piece to a whole puzzle, whereas before it was the whole puzzle, and desperately so. I feel like I'm riding the wave of art rather than having it ride me. I believe originally it was more of a false god than it is now. Now it's just a part of all that is sacred.
Jerry does a great many pieces of art. Sometimes he's painting, sometimes he's constructing different kinds of machines and buildings. And his garden has gates in all the 4 directions. But all of Jerry's work has this sense of the sacred mixed in with the trickster and the play and the comical. It's very animated. I feel the shamanistic quality of Jerry's work is that he has a conversation with the dark. And maybe what we consider ugly, maybe what we consider difficult, he shines light into it. He brings a respect for the dark and a respect for the cauldron where everything gets churned up inside oneself.
I don't know what the future holds, but I feel like the work that I've been doing and the work that Jerry and his art has been doing is all calling us forward into some future that we don't know, but I do know that we live in a time of incredible change and transformation, and that whatever we'll be doing, we will be helping ourselves and other people transition and transform from life to death to rebirth to the life that's on the other side. Send your roots deeply into the earth and your branches wide to the sky. And I pray that your union will be blessed.
I hear the real, the far-off sound that hails a new creation. No storm can shake my inmost calm, while to that rock I'm clinging, since love is Lord of heaven and earth.
In retrospect, after all this time of having left the world so completely and coming back so completely, I feel life now is simply being available both artistically and humanly for other people. It's just about being in the moment, and I find most of what I have to offer, which I guess is where my art and life are going, is my story about you can't get there by way of will, intelligence, and good intentions. And I think it's always been about surrender and being present to what that surrender leaves, which is this kind of luminous void, which is like the place where everything unfolds.
Hi, we're back with Jerry. So you talk about surrender. How would you define surrender?
Well, I think surrender is not defeat, to start with. I think surrender is a conscious attention and a kind of proper tension between activity and inactivity, where you hold a kind of reverence, trusting that reality is exactly perfect and that it will unfold. I think to give ourselves to that with that kind of attention is the truest kind of surrender.
And would you say that, I mean, there have been throughout world history numerous spiritual paths, numerous spiritual teachers. Are there tools that people could use to help them come into the moment, to help them have that definition of surrender?
I think, all spiritual paths have tools, and I think any one of them, if you truly go to the core of it, would be a helpful process. But I also think to know that the tools aren't enough, and yet to go about it as if they were, is an important sort of paradox. But I
you have to make a lot of effort to realize you're not going to get there from the effort.
Yes, and a kind of passionate belief and trust that exactly what is in life, exactly where your feet are, as Lao Tzu says, is the next best place for the next step. And I think it takes that kind of fierce determination to trust that, and I think it will come through as much as you can trust it. And I think most of us, we limit what we think we can do. I mean,
and why do you think that is? I mean, why do you think we don't have that as human beings?
Well, for one thing, I don't think especially the West, we're not a society that necessarily teaches that. I think, we're taught to succeed in ways that are materialistic, that define more clearly identities having to do with what we do. We're not taught a lot about being. It's more about doing, having. So I think that's one of the huge obstacles.
You also talk a lot, and some of your pictures, I don't know, I think we've seen them, the picture you have of the holy fool. What does that mean to you? Is that symbol, that image?
Well, I think the world with its reason, although reason has you can go a long way with reason, and I think it's a very, it's an important aspect of being. But I think the fool I think it takes a certain kind of healthy foolishness to be able to defy that limit that reason brings you up against, and trust the intuitive flashes, to trust the leaps of consciousness that might just joyfully give you a direction to go, and everything in life says it's foolish, but to do it anyway. I mean, I think the holy fool sort of embodies that, the ability to do that, and the innocence it takes, a kind of conscious innocence that is, has determination behind it, and it knows it's nothing else but that, and that's the nature of our being. It's not guilt, it's not shame, it's not, it's not even accomplishment, but it's a kind of holy innocence in the hands of a reality that wants very much to hold our lives. And I think to be able to trust that is
what do you think it takes for people to trust that? And we all have flashes of it. We all trust it to some extent. What do you think can make that trust, that faith, that experience grow for humans?
Well, more than anything else, outrageous courage, I mean, or a willingness is probably...
An openness, would you say, to it?
Sure, yes. I mean, I think it's is having the courage to do what you may not have support. And I think that's only the beginning step of it. I think from there, you need to see the product of that trust. You know, you need to see the magic that comes through because you have given yourself with that kind of courage. You know, I think there's something about however much we can leap out into trust is exactly where the gods meet us. And so I think, many of us don't operate out of very much courage in the area of that kind of faith and trust. But I think, others of us do. And I think it's exactly proportional to where it is you're willing to go to get to that place of surrender. And I think anyone can do and can find what they most want by way of coming to terms with that surrender. I mean, it's not some exclusive thing that's reserved for the mystics. I think it's up now more than ever in our world. And I think if, the thing that's going to save our planet, save our being, save our society is not a lot of good intentions and a lot of money, it's learning to listen in a very deep way, because it's the harmony that runs the universe and knows how to run it far better than our puny little efforts.
And do you see, you travel a lot now and the book's coming out, and we've had some time to talk, that you see that in some ways more mainstream people are open to that message in a way. So, are you encouraged by the fact, the magic that's happening around your book and your art and the video?
I am. I also think it's, it's still pretty, it's still pretty out there. I think, the best defense of anything is genuine joy. I think the one thing that carried my life and continues to carry it is the ability to stay in touch with the miracle, to stay in touch with the next moment that gives me the exact next gift I need, which sometimes is nothing more than a burst of energy, And I think that in itself is the best defense for the reality. Whether the world gets it or not, everybody gets joy. And I think, with that kind of joy has to come a useful wisdom that's available to other people. If you've traversed that territory, if you've given yourself to it, you just learn things. You have to learn things in order to survive. And I think what you have learned becomes useful. And so the usefulness of the understanding and the joy are irresistible. You don't need to defend it. Whether the world gets it or not, just be happy.
So, do you feel that, like, generally you're happy, you're joyous, the magic in you are in close connection?
Let's put it this way. I think there's a cyclical nature to physical reality which continues. You have to honor the physical, which means there are still terrifying moments. I think the joy of life now is knowing what to do with those moments, is knowing that it's almost like, there's a Christian saying, until you die and be reborn, or something like that, you won't experience eternal life. I think eternal life, for me, and it's not just a Christian thing, it's a universal idea, I believe. I think the eternal life is like you come up against a boogeyman, that in life which scares the hell out of you. And what you do at that moment is, we all want to run, and many of us do, but I think the gift of so-called eternal life is the memory. What you remember is that, you've traversed the territory of your worst fear. You've done it once, and you let the gods know you mean business. eternal life is the memory just when you need it of how to do it again. And so joy comes out of that renewal. I still come up against my fears. It's not like I don't think we could ever eliminate them, but I think what we can do is know how to walk into them again. And there's an all-important element of grace in that. You know, I think the grace...
And grace, define that?
Grace is a place where, it's what I said earlier about human effort isn't enough. It's a place where you're brought to your knees by reality. You've done your best. You know, you've done everything in your power to find the most beautiful way of being on the planet, and you don't feel like you're doing a very good job. And I think grace is the place, and it's almost more a feminine concept, because I think it's like Yogananda talks about God the Father, God the Mother. God the Father is a demanding aspect. It demands a kind of perfection that we ask of ourselves, and we all have a part of that masculine determination. And God the Mother is the forgiving aspect. She loves you no matter what. And I think grace I've always associated with more with that feminine aspect. I think I have failed God the Father, but I feel grace is God the Mother. And I think it comes with that kind of surrender, and there's nothing more you can do. You can't do it any better, and it's not good enough. And you just give yourself to that moment, and in that comes the grace that gives you that renewal.
And that's the place of surrender.
Yes.
So how did it come about that you felt it was time for you to make these stories available to people in the void, the available void, or the
accessible,
the accessible void, or the inspired heart, as it became known?
Well, my dear friend Carol Wright gifted me with a website, and she had a lot of questions about how I lived. And so I realized I couldn't answer them literally. It just felt like dumb information that had nothing to do with the journey. So I began writing a few stories of the magic that carried life. And the most wonderful publisher, Connie Shaw, saw them on the website, and she asked me to write a book. And I said, well, when do you want it? And she said, 4 months. So I wrote a book.
And you felt completely in line with that. That seemed, because of all the beautiful energy around it, it just felt right to proceed on it.
I mean, I don't claim to be a writer, but I found the creative process so similar to doing my artwork that it was actually quite easy. I had incredible energy for it, and the stories I have been living on behalf of other people's suffering. My stories are about the moments that I see in other people's lives, and so I've always had a story that has been helpful to them. So the stories were just available, and they even came out in a way that made a kind of sense, and I felt like the book just blew out in the most perfect way. And then of course the imperfections of editing and everything else made it, I think, an interesting book.
Is on the cover of that book, that's one of your pieces, right?
It's an interior figure of one of the pieces. It's actually, it's a piece it's a carved wooden, they're all box-like, coffin-like almost. And I think, basically the feel, although I didn't plan this, is a kind of, I think the exploration of death and finding life in it is what my art boxes are like now. Although, as I said, it wasn't a planned thing. I kind of see it in retrospect. It's like in some way they're scary and death-like, but they're playful and they make people laugh and they're funny, and and so that particular art piece, it's a figure with a pregnant belly with a strobe light behind it, so the belly lights up because it's glass, and then there's this life-size figure inside, and that's the face of that figure.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I guess we've seen it before, so we're coming to the end of the show again. I mean, the hour goes so quickly when there's just so much happening, and there's so much intent to share the experience of that growth, of that transformation, of that consciousness. So, if anybody wants any information about Jerry, the book, the art, you know, what his plans are, when he's going to be doing book signings, which I assume at some point he is going to be doing. Just please call me, Alan, 805-687-2053. I'll tell you about his website, every other, you know, any information you need. You know, we love doing this. We love sharing this with you. Come again. Your input's really important to us. So thank you. Good night. God bless you.